Over the last 2 videos at the lab, we've been working to determine the likelihood of popular My Little Pony grimdark fanfic Cupcakes actually happening. In the first of 3 parts, we declared that Pinkie Pie is definitely insane enough to do such a thing, diagnosing her with mania, which can lead to psychosis and homicidal ideation. In the second part, through testing I will never again undergo, we determined that Pinkie's pony cupcakes would not pass unnoticed unless she was the only one eating them. This time, we're going to wrap up all the loose ends, culminating in a final verdict for 2 things. Could cupcakes happen? And furthermore, if it did, would it happen to Rainbow Dash the way it did? Well, I've already kept this going for a month and a half, so let's end it already. Cupcakes Part 3, intro, go! First things first. Yes, we know that ponies disappearing from Ponyville, especially one of the elements of harmony, would eventually be noticed. However, this doesn't mean Pinkie would be the first to be blamed. Until her basement is found out, she's in the safe zone. And if some pony finds her basement, well, less work for Pinkie. She doesn't have to drug them to take him there. Next, a friend of mine pointed something out to me after the first episode of this little 3-parter got published. In the story, Pinkie mentions that she doesn't make the rules. Sounds sinister, don't you think? Maybe there's some pony else behind all this, with more power than ever imagined, forcing Pinkie to cut apart any pony deemed a threat under the guise of it being all for fun and cupcakes, maybe after brainwashing or mind-controlling her. No, probably not. As I said in the first episode, hallucinations are a common symptom of mania. Pinkie probably just had a hallucination of someone telling her what to do. Hey, it's more realistic than that bad fanfic synopsis I just gave, okay? But on the topic of bad fanfics, we're going to need to take a closer look at Cupcakes this time around in order to see just how realistic this torture is. And our first nitpicking begins before the torture even starts, with that little instant sedation cupcake. Rainbow Dash ate a single cupcake, not noted to be any larger than normal, and within approximately 5 to 10 seconds, the drugs inside, which she couldn't even detect, knocked her out for what we can assume is at least an hour. The sedatives required to near instantly knock out a young adult female for that long would not be able to be contained inside a single regular-sized cupcake unless they were piled into the point where it was basically a pile of pills and syringes surrounded by crumbs, in which case she'd clearly know something was up. Sure, there's got to be some sort of sedative that exists that's strong enough to have those effects in small doses, but no way would it be available for an ordinary Ponyville baker to get. Now, her restraints. Let's take a look at this paragraph, cut straight from the story. She tried to shake her head, but found that the taut leather strap kept it firmly in place. She struggled to move, but the braces around her chest and limbs glued her to the upright planks. Her legs were spread wide apart. The only part of her not tied down were her wings, as the frame was backless. Or, if you prefer the revised and republished version of the story, she tried to shake her head, but found that a taut leather strap held it firmly in place. She struggled to move, but braces around her chest and limbs glued her to a rack formed from a series of sturdy planks which spread her legs wide apart. Dash's wings were the only part of her not tied down, and they fluttered frantically while she struggled to escape. Before we go any further, trust me when I say that we need to deviate away from the story itself for a moment and do a little backlog diving. It's not clear exactly when Cupcakes was published, but it was thought to be sometime in January of 2011. 2011? Really? 3 years old and people still talk about it? Then again, Minecraft and Super Smash Bros. Brawl are even older, and they're not really dropping in popularity either. And the inclusion of blank flank as a term, not to mention Silver Spoon as a character, is a reference to episode 12 of the show, meaning the earliest the story could have been published is on January 7th. I'm going to judge Rainbow Dash's interpretation in the story based solely on the first half of season 1, up to and including episode 13 to be safe, so that people won't get on my case for using information that wasn't included in the show at the time of the story's creation. Now, first off, even at this early point in the show, we've seen Rainbow's strength. She can fly fast enough to clear the sky of clouds in 10 seconds, she can kick a dragon hard enough to make it flinch for several seconds and clearly be in pain, despite their scales being hard enough that a baby dragon can completely ignore being stuck full of pins, and she can create a tornado just by flying in circles. And we're supposed to believe that she can be restrained to helpless levels by some leather straps? Granted, once Pinkie starts cutting her up, she wouldn't really have much strength. But there were a good few minutes beforehand where Buffalo Billy Philly is just monologuing like a superhero's arch nemesis. She had time to break her makeshift shackles and the strength to do so. And before you go saying she was suffering from dramatic shock, I concede that would be an understandable excuse. You know, seeing your best friend being all crazy in front of you and you being strapped down, I can understand that. if not for the fact that it outright says in the text she was trying to escape. I repeat from earlier, Dash's wings were the only part of her not tied down, and they fluttered frantically while she struggled to escape. The issue is not that she didn't try to escape, but that the story portrayed her as not being strong enough to do so. Even then, Pinkie talked for several minutes, which should have been enough time for Rainbow to realize what was going on and actually try to get out, dramatic shock or no. Plus, Pinkie Pie's first action was not to cut Rainbow's wings off, but to go for her cutie marks on her flanks instead. That amount of pain should have given her the fear-powered adrenaline she needed to kickstart her muscles and bust out of those leather straps like Alfred Hines from Nottingham Prison. What, you guys never heard of him? Shame on you all, use Google sometimes, people! Next, when Pinkie Pie is trying to cut off Rainbow's wings, the knife that she uses is sharp enough to cut through the skin, but can't get through the bone. Yet, wing bones are typically light and fragile to allow the creature to actually take flight. So the sharpness of the knife shouldn't have been a problem. Just hitting it hard enough should have broken the bone enough for the wings to just fall off if she could get through the flesh. Surprisingly, the use of adrenaline to wake Rainbow Dash back up is actually correct. Injecting epinephrine into the heart can actually sometimes bring someone back from the dead, so waking someone up from unconsciousness isn't too much of a stretch. However, the use of electricity is inaccurate to say the least. It's not specified how much electricity is being pumped into Rainbow Dash, but enough to make her body seize and thrust around for 5 minutes straight should have done more than just make her wet herself and briefly lose comprehension of the scene around her. I can't declare for certain what should have happened, but well, it seems a little toned down in my opinion. Then again, I've never been electrocuted for 5 minutes straight. Now for one of the more disturbing parts, the organ puns. No, not that organ, I mean stomach, pancreas, liver, etc. For one thing, Pinkie pulls out Rainbow's pancreas and kidney before her stomach, something that would be very difficult and inconvenient considering both are located behind the stomach and will be more easily accessible from the back or side, but Pinkie is clearly coming in from the front. Granted, there are 2 kidneys, one of which is just behind the intestines, which she takes out first and foremost, but that doesn't excuse the pancreas. And that's one thing I never thought I'd say, and it's go on a t-shirt. But really, in terms of inaccuracies, that's about all there is, and surprisingly, it's a fair amount. Rainbow should never have gotten drugged in the first place, and even if she somehow did, various parts of that torture sequence shouldn't have gone the way they did. So hopefully that soothes your nightmares a bit. If you had any. Let's be honest. Have you ever had nightmares caused by cupcakes? I bet responses to that were mixed. Some of you were actually scared, while some weren't. And here's a guess. Those of you in the former category discovered it long before those in the latter category, and allow me to explain why I think so. Cupcakes was, surprisingly, one of the first MLP fanfictions. The first archived MLP fanfic was in late January of 2011, which you may recall as being the month Cupcakes came out. So back then, a story that puts these candy-colored ponies in a grimdark scenario was unique and unexpected. People found it scary because there were no other scary pony stories. Same thing with My Little Dashie being sad, Past Sins being unique for having an Alicorn OC, Fallout Equestria being special for being so long and crossing over with Fallout. That's why latecomers find it so overrated. They hear about Cupcakes being this famous scary story, but then they read it and it's nothing special to them, because now there's tons of other scary stories with ponies all over the internet. Fanfiction even has a dark tag, that's how popular it's become, just like with human and, as of recently, anthro stories. As overdone as the whole human goes to Equestria thing is, the truth remains that there was a time when it was an original idea that people piggybacked on. And that's why opinions on Cupcakes are so divided. Some find the scariest thing about it to be its bad grammar, some find it to be horribly nightmare-inducing. It's all about your prior exposure to grimdark pony stories. So say what you will about this story. It earned its reputation for a reason, and now I've dissected those reasons for you all. Is Pinkie Pie insane enough to kill her friends? Yes. Could she bake them into cupcakes and get away with it? Yes. Could she kill Rainbow Dash? No, at least not in the way the story shows it. This story is almost entirely realistic, but it slipped up right in the final step. Or, you know, I'm just being a little overanalytical. I really am ripping off game theory, aren't I?